Hello, brothers and sisters of the human family. We're here to discuss the win win solutions we've all been looking for. Thanks for joining me. This is Voluntary Living with me, David James Rodriguez, and we are building a world based on consent, self ownership, and freedom. I hope that's exciting to you. It's very exciting to me. I'm excited to be in studio today. In today's show, we're going to cover why I started the show, and who is David James Rodriguez? What is voluntary living, aka voluntarism, and why I believe it's the future of humanity? What is consent, self ownership, and freedom? How to know what is wrong from right, and a new freedom movie recommendation because we are the new media. If you haven't noticed, the corporate mainstream channels out there, they're lying to you, they're lying to me. And it was going on for a long time. And so humanity is waking up now, and it's a very exciting time to be alive. I would say probably the most exciting time ever, especially with these devices and the internet. And they're double-edged swords, but I started this show, Voluntary Living, so we can talk about consent, self ownership, and freedom. Because if you've gone down the rabbit holes that I've gone down, and you must have if you got to this show already, we're looking for solutions now. So now we're looking for the win win positive outcomes, and that's what we talk about in this show. So I do want to welcome you all because many of you know who I am, many of you don't know who I am. But I want to start with the Declaration of Independence because America is a great country. I love this country. I love the people. I love the heritage and the tradition. And one thing we never learned in school was the Declaration of Independence. So I want to pull that up here first. And you can see that if you're seeing the screens here, the second paragraph says, "We hold these truths to be self evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." I'm going to say that again. Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And I thought this was a very powerful line in the Declaration of Independence because I never read that before. And consent is you giving permission for someone to either rule you, to contract with you, to engage with you. But we can see here that over 240 years ago, the founding document is saying the just powers come from the consent of the governed. So, did you consent to have 40% of your money taken from you? I didn't. Did you consent to pay 1% of your house or property in taxes and property taxes? I didn't. And what's going on in schools, what's going on in hospitals, what's going on in emergency situation, what's going on? It's almost like government is not following through with its promise to you and I, and it's almost like government's out of control. Like the Bill of Rights was meant to restrict the government, and maybe the Constitution has failed. So I want to pull up that clip here. I get so excited about this stuff, and I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. But I want to pull up Dr. Ron Paul. Many of you know that he ran for president 3 times, and I was someone who was really inspired by him in 2008, but it was really 2012. And that's when he said he's the champion of the Constitution. And I said, man, let's go, champion of the Constitution. That's one of my favorite words. And as I started to get deeper into morality, determining right from wrong, I found the Constitution very problematic, mainly because of taxation and war. So those are euphemisms used by the state. And taxation is robbery, war is mass murder. And we'll talk about General Smedley Butler another time, but he said war is a racket. He wrote a book titled War is a Racket. And he realized that he was a hitman for the mega corporations. And this is in the, I think it was the 1930s that he put that book out there and was very honest and sincere. Like, these fine young men, mostly men, uh, going to war, and they thought they had some beautiful ideals, but what they were really doing was about providing a profit for big oil and big energy and these types of mega corporations. So let's listen to Ron Paul say the Constitution has failed. This is from 2012 in his farewell address.
Our Constitution, which was intended to limit government power and abuse, has failed. Our Constitution, which was intended to limit government power and abuse, has failed.
Evolve beyond.
Our Constitution, which was intended to limit government power and abuse, has failed. Our Constitution, which was intended to limit government power and abuse, has failed.
Transcend
Our Constitution, which was intended to limit government power and abuse, has failed. Our Constitution, which was intended to limit government power and abuse, has failed.
That's good. I had that loop in practice voluntary consensual relationships with peaceful people. Yes. I had that looping because it's such a fast sentence of him saying what many of my friends and people they don't want to say, which is, you know what? If the Constitution was going to limit the government, it has failed. And so this is after, 25 years in politics, running for president multiple times. It's failed. And I know that's a big blow to understand because I was a constitutionalist too. And I thought that was something we have to get back to. But if it failed, maybe it's time to evolve beyond it, transcend beyond that. So I will get to that here in a second because the name of the show is Voluntary Living. And that's why I'm so grateful to be here and to share these ideas with you about the solutions. And voluntary living is the idea that nobody's allowed to force you or me against our will to do anything. This is voluntarism, meaning we're all equal. You're a queen or a king on the earth, as am I, and we're children of the Most High or the Creator, Source, whatever you believe in. Certainly, government is not your ruler, and they're not mine. And we just read that the just powers of government come from the consent of the governed. So, if you didn't consent and I didn't consent, how does anybody have authority over us? This was a big awakening for me, and one of the big awakenings also came from this book from Etienne de la Boetie, Squared, Government, the Biggest Scam in History. Highly recommend it. And he goes through and shows all the details about how you can't delegate rights that you don't have. And you're not bound to a contract that you never signed. These are very powerful points. So I recommend you take a look at this book. And there's another one, Slavery Gone for Good, Corey Andrelat. This is a book of quotes. You can open it up and just find very powerful quotes anywhere in here. We'll cover this as well. But I also want to pull up the clip from Lysander Spooner. Now, this is a bombshell. Source number 2. Lysander Spooner was a businessman from the 1800s, and he was actually against slavery when it was risky to be against slavery. And he started his own private postal service to compete with the United States Postal Service. And very prolific author, and he wrote something, an essay called No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority. And this is over 150 years old. So I'll let you listen to Lysander Spooner.
Section 1. The Constitution has no inherent authority or obligation. It has no authority or obligation at all, unless as a contract between man and man. And it does not so much as even purport to be a contract between persons now existing. It purports, at most, to be only a contract between persons living 80 years ago, and it can be supposed to have been a contract then only between persons who had already come to years of discretion, so as to be competent to make reasonable and obligatory contracts. Furthermore, we know historically that only a small portion even of the people then existing were consulted on the subject, or asked or permitted to express either their consent or dissent in any formal manner. Those persons, if any, who did give their consent formally are all dead now. Most of them have been dead 40, 50, 60, or 70 years, and the Constitution, so far as it was their contract, died with them. They had no natural power or right to make it obligatory on their children. It is not only plainly impossible in the nature of things that they could bind their posterity, but they did not even attempt to bind them. That is to say, the instrument does not purport to be an agreement between anybody but the people then existing, nor does it, either expressly or impliedly, assert any right, power, or disposition on their part to bind anybody but themselves. Let us see. Its language is, "We the people of the United States," that is, the people then existing in the United States, "in order to form a more perfect union, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." It is plain in the first place that this language, as an agreement, purports to be only what it at most really was, that is, a contract between the people then existing, and of necessity binding as a contract only upon those then existing. In the second place, the language neither expresses nor implies that they had any intention or desire, nor that they imagined they had any right or power to bind their posterity to live under it. It does not say that their posterity will, shall, or must live under it. It only says, in effect, that their hopes and motives in adopting it were that it might prove useful to their posterity, as well as to themselves, by promoting their union, safety, tranquility, liberty, etc. Suppose an agreement were entered into in this form. We, the people of Boston, agree to maintain a fort on Governor's Island, to protect ourselves and our posterity against invasion. This agreement, as an agreement, would clearly bind nobody but the people then existing. Secondly, it would assert no right, power, or disposition on their part to compel their posterity to maintain such a fort. It would only indicate that the supposed welfare of their posterity was one of the motives that induced the original parties to enter into this agreement. When a man says he is building a house for himself and his posterity, he does not mean to be understood as saying that he has any thought of binding them, nor is it to be inferred that he is so foolish as to imagine that he has any right or power to bind them to live in it. So far as they are concerned, he only means to be understood as saying his hopes and motives in building it are that they, or at least some of them, may find it for their happiness to live in it. When a man says he is planting a tree for himself and his posterity, he does not mean to be understood as saying that he has any thought of compelling them, nor is it to be inferred that he is such a simpleton as to imagine that he has any right or power to compel them to eat the fruit. So far as they are concerned, he only means to say that his hopes and motives in planting the tree are that its fruit may be agreeable to them. So it was with those who originally adopted the Constitution. Whatever may have been their personal intentions, The legal meaning of their language, so far as their posterity was concerned, simply was that their hopes and motives in entering into the agreement were that it might prove useful and acceptable to their posterity, that it might promote their union, safety, tranquility, and welfare, and that it might tend to secure to them the blessings of liberty. The language does not assert nor at all imply any right, power, or disposition on the part of the original parties to the agreement to compel their posterity to live under it. If they had intended to bind their posterity to live under it, they should have said that their objective was not to secure to them the blessings of liberty, but to make slaves of them. For if their posterity are bound to live under it, they are nothing less than the slaves of their foolish, tyrannical, and dead grandfathers. It cannot be said that the Constitution formed the people of the United States for all time into a corporation. It does not speak of the people as a corporation, but as individuals. A corporation does not describe itself as we, nor as people, nor as ourselves. Nor does a corporation, in legal language, have any posterity. It supposes itself to have, and speaks of itself as having, perpetual existence as a single individuality. Moreover, no body of men existing at any one time have the power to create a perpetual corporation. A corporation can become practically perpetual only by the voluntary accession of new members, as the old ones die off. But for this voluntary accession of new members, the corporation necessarily dies with the death of those who originally composed it. Legally speaking, therefore, there is in the Constitution nothing that professes or attempts to bind the posterity of those who established it. If, then, those who established the Constitution had no power to bind, and did not attempt to bind their posterity, the question arises whether their posterity have bound themselves. If they have done so, they can have done so only in one or both of these two ways, that is, by voting and paying taxes.
Wow. 1870, he wrote that. So the essence is that you can't bind your children or bind the next generation by your own signature. They have to join. And so we're beginning to see the intergenerational component, because what we're dealing with on the planet right now is high level intergenerational organized criminals. And just like the king of old used to want to guarantee that his son takes on the kingship or the queenship, this is the passing the throne. But then from Magna Carta in 1215, when King John was going to be beheaded, he said, "Oh, I guess I'll give barons some type of rights and some type of freedoms that they deserve." And then they evolved to a representative type government, and then we have the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and this is an evolution of freedom. And if you're a ruler, do you want people out there free, building businesses, growing wealth, training their children, or do you want to suppress that? You got to put the other hat on from a control standpoint. And that's what we're at now. So freedom has gone from the monarchy, where there was little freedom, to zero freedom, you're a peasant, to the constitutional republic, where now we have unalienable rights from the creator. And what we saw in the last 3 years is that people don't know they have unalienable rights because the schools didn't teach them, parents, churches, businesses, nobody knows these critical facts of self-ownership. Do you own your body? Yes, you do. So do I. So how can anybody tell you to put a mask on to inject drugs into your body? They don't. So why did people do it? Because they don't know. So freedom is evolving, and that's what voluntary living is about. No more are we going to accept coercive organizations and individuals in our lives. I'm not. Because a coercive individual, an organization, they've lost the argument. saying, you have to do this or we're going to hurt you. Where's the freedom in that? Where's the respect in that? There isn't. That is serious violation of your God given rights, which is why you never give an inch of your freedom. So we have been slowly cooking in the hot water, as you know, boiling the frogs, and the water's getting hotter and the water's getting hotter. And now humanity is starting to realize that these intergenerational predators are ready to strike on humanity. And that's what's happening now. We see them unrolling. When I say them, the World Economic Forum, United Nations, these dudes who want a global government after this whole pandemic, telling you what to do with your children, telling you you can't leave your house. Can you imagine they had a curfew out here in California? I don't know about other places, but the governor tried to tell us we couldn't go out after 10 p.m. Well, I was just watching a documentary last night. That's a tactic of totalitarian regimes. Brothers and sisters, we are living during a time when the regime is going down because we have a tradition of freedom in this country. And so that's what I want to emphasize too, is that I don't hate the Constitution. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the Declaration of Independence. It's a very strong document. And we're going to evolve. We're going to grow as a human family, as a conscious people. You know, like, what are we doing? What are we allowing these people to do? Now, as we'll get deeper into the shows, we don't pull any punches here, because if there's anything that you deserve out there, it's the truth, just like I did as a child. And asking questions, eventually you realize most adults don't know what's going on, do they? And you see, like, oh, the teachers don't know what's going on. And I used to think that older people are wiser, and sometimes they are, but sometimes they're just as confused as the young person because they haven't been learning. They haven't been reading and watching and paying attention and listening to their heart. This is something that I never heard. You know, pay attention to what you feel, or listen to your inner voice, your inner mind, your heart, maybe God. For some of us out here, it's very significant to be alive. It's very significant to have a body. And once we tap into that, we will not be controlled any longer. And that's what me and some of my friends are doing. And there's so many things I want to share with you. But this first episode, I want to share the power of being a human right now in 2023. Because our children are going to copy us, emulate us, if we do a good job as being an example. Or if we don't, then they're going to go the other way. And they're going to say, ooh, mother, father, uncle, auntie, grandpa, grandma, brother, sister, they did this. I'm not going to do that. Because we're facing ourselves now. We're facing fear versus courage. We're facing faith versus doubt. And we get to choose how we live. And this is a self-education process. So I think I should tell you a little bit about myself, because the education world is really one of the reasons I'm on this planet, to help correct this injustice. I edited and published this book, The Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto, because I reached out to him almost 8 or 9 years ago now, with the help of Richard Grove and Tragedy and Hope, because my original dream on the earth was just to make a lot of money and sit on the beach and relax. And I found out that's not a meaningful life. You can do that if you want. As long as you're not harming anybody, do what you like. but I started to feel the pain of the school system. In this book, the subtitle is An Intimate Investigation into the Prison of Modern Schooling. And the original version was published, I think, 1999, and it was out of print for about 15 years. And so I reached out to John Taylor Gatto, the two-time New York State Teacher of the Year, and I said, John, as I'm learning about the history of the school system, and I see Horace Mann on the name of schools in every city I go to, basically, it's disgusting, because many of you know that Horace Mann was the guy from Massachusetts who went to Prussia in the 1840s, and he was studying the world's first compulsory school system, and then he wanted to bring it over to the United States. And after 10 years of lobbying and politicking, he got it over here. So he's the father of the American school system. So I told John Gatto, I said, John, I'm tired of seeing this guy's name on these schools. I want to see your name on the libraries, your name on schools or academies. And so I reached out to John Taylor Gatto, and he gave me permission. And then his wife pulled me aside and said, you know, John wants you to publish this new book that he has coming out. I said, okay, let me think about it. Never published a book before. I called him back in 2 weeks. I said, okay, Janet and John, I'll do it. And she said, you know what? We changed our mind. We don't want you to publish this new book. We want you to publish this out of print book, The Underground History of American Education. I said, all right, let's go. So this is volume 1, and we have 10 new essays in here, and I got 2 more volumes coming. But I tell you that because my perspective is from an educational perspective. I went to public school, like 50 million people today, and most people went to a public school or a private school that resembles a public school. You have to get permission to go to the bathroom, to get a drink of water, and I do call it a day prison, because where else do you have to get permission to urinate or defecate? I mean, come on. So I published that book. I actually started a school. I'm principal of a private virtual school called Valor Academy. I do early high school graduations and homeschool consulting and apprenticeship trainings. And I've spoken in China, I've spoken in Mexico, I've spoken in New Hampshire, Florida, Mississippi. And if you want a training, you can hire me to come out there, and we'll go through a 4-hour workshop or a 1-hour training, whatever you like. So that's a little bit about me. I sold my first business when I was 26, and I lived in Korea, lived in New York, and kind of following where God is leading me, because it's pretty clear to me that there's a creator of the universe, and he loves me, he loves you. And so what we're doing now is we're realizing who we are. We're realizing the significance of this life before these predators put the mark of the beast, is what the Bible would say, or control all money and control all travel. They're unrolling the central banking digital currency, CBDC for short, and digital IDs. And this is their Hail Mary. This is their big move that if they fail, it's over for these people, I believe. And if they get it, which I think they'll get it for some people are going to say, yes, sign me up for government money that can be turned off. Sign me up for these things. And it's going to be hard, because they're going to use all means necessary to force us into it. Okay? These guys have all the money in the world. They don't need money. They want control. And just like a king passing down the throne, they want to pass down power to themselves. And we'll get deeper into these things, but let's talk about what is self-ownership and why it's so important you get this. Okay, so I asked you earlier who owns your body. For sure, these are your hands, this is your body, and how come nobody ever asked that before to you? Because that's one of the secrets. Because with self-ownership comes property rights. This is your hand. You can do whatever you want with this. There's just one rule. You got to respect other people's self-ownership, which means you're not allowed to aggress against other people. And the third part is you have a right to personal security or to be left alone. And if somebody hurts you, you can defend yourself. Now, what's so amazing about this country is the Second Amendment. However, the Second Amendment didn't give you the right to defend yourself. It was trying to limit the government from taking that right away. Remember, it says the right to bear arms shall not be infringed, meaning they can't do anything to that. But that's what they're doing right now. And if you saw the video from one of the jabronis at the World Economic Forum, they're asking about the CBDC, the digital currency, because the money's digital anyways right now, right? I can send you some money on Venmo or PayPal. It's all just digits on the screen. And so he's saying, yeah, with this digital currency, we can block certain purchases from going on and prevent it. And they said, well, for example, what type of purchases would you like to block? He says, well, ammunition. So they're telling you what they're going to do. So you got to get your mind right, because what we're seeing is a bifurcation of humanity, and that means to separate, okay, like oil and water. So the free people are beginning to realize they want freedom, and the slave-minded people unknowingly, unwittingly, that they're going to follow and do whatever the government tells them to do. And we saw that with the masks. And I even saw a clip from InfoWars that said they got two inside whistleblowers that said the lockdowns are coming again in September and I think October with travel on the airplane. So, okay, if you own the airplane, you can require people to wear or do whatever they want. So this is the point of we got to build the world that we want. And one of the strategies that is so inspiring to me is the exit and build strategy. And this came from Derek Bros and John Bush in Texas and Mexico. And I spoke at the 2022 event. Exit and build means exit, leave those coercive systems, and build the world that you want to see. Now, that's hard. It's easy to go to let's say, a political rally and beg somebody else to do it. But for you to actually vote with your feet, vote with your money, that requires you to change your habits. That requires you to change your thoughts, feelings, and actions and actually do something about that. So one of the examples is a gentleman named Mike Cullum who started a private grocery store in Penn Valley. I think it's Renegade something. But he started a private grocery store. And there's a health clinic in Siskiyou County called The Well, like a private hospital. Because what they did in the grocery stores, what they did in the hospitals, you think they're going to do that again? I think so. So with this whole travel thing, we got to start our own airlines. And that's a lot of money, but somebody's going to do it. Somebody, because they even have the Freedom Travel Alliance. I believe that's the name of it, where it's kind of like a Uber for planes, because I got kicked off planes in the last few years, and some of these are on video. So I'm trying to do a documentary of what happened the last 3 years, because we have so much footage from Santa Cruz and what we did down there in civil disobedience. Maybe we'll show a clip next time of Operation Cash Drop and opening up the beaches. We had a clip from the health officer saying we were hoping to keep the beaches closed, but the people are not willing to be governed anymore. So that's what this is about. We're declaring that we own ourselves. We're declaring that we're free. And this is the intention of this show. So I want to share one other thing here, and then we'll tap out of here because so much to talk about. But this show is about solutions. So we will talk about some of the problems, but my gosh, if you have any type of consciousness, you see that it is pretty severe out there. I want to say that we're standing on the shoulders of the people who came before us. I mentioned and showed Lysander Spooner, also Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard. These are all prolific writers and presenters of freedom, and they called out the state as the threat, the main threat. And if you haven't heard of the study of the word called democide, that's DEMOCIDE, that's death by government. And there was a study at the University of Hawaii that proved that the biggest threat to humanity is the government. And they killed over, I think it's 160 million of their own citizens in the 20th century. So we want to recognize that this is intergenerational freedom that we are building. And my definition of intergenerational freedom is when you transfer the knowledge of self-ownership, respect for self-ownership, and personal security, meaning the non-aggression principle and self-defense principle, to the next generation, to the children around you. Because the children are the targets. That's what this whole agenda is in the schools. And why would you hand your child over to total strangers? But I know because that's what my parents did. It's a habit. It's a cultural norm, but that's all changing right now. So there's a freedom movie recommendation. This is a optional voluntary homework for next week. It's a movie written by Larkin Rose called The Jones Plantation, and it just came out in the last week or two. And I watched it, and I'm going to watch it with some friends this week, so I recommend you do that as well and see how we change culture, how we change the world. And we just want to respect Larkin and Andrew and the whole team who put that together, because this is the solution. We're not going to try to beg Hollywood to change. We create our own stuff. And there's music artists I want to bring on as well, because I've seen it with my own eyes. There is a great self-ownership awakening happening, and I'm very hopeful of the future. And we will have to go through some challenges, but humanity is destined to be free. And I think it's our opportunity to shine the light, to speak the truth, to take steps forward in courage and faith and love. You see the shirt? Love's my new normal. And this is what we're going to do. So I want to thank you for joining me on the first show with Voluntary Living, where we are building a world based on consent, self-ownership, and freedom.